Hey, Jordan, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. So my name is Jordan Bryce. I am based out of California. I am an area vice president for DocuSign. I've been in sales, quasi sales industry, or directly in the sales industry for close to 20 years now. So been as an individual contributor, and then for the past 12 years or so, I've been in various leadership roles with various companies. So excited to be here today and to chat with you.
Cool. Why sales for you?
Great question. I think the one thing I learned about myself very early on in my life is that I like to influence outcomes, right? And so when you think about, like, there's two things that I'm really passionate about. So the first one is influencing outcomes, and the second one is changing people's lives, right, for the better, obviously, right? And so the influencing outcomes led me to sales, and then the changing people's lives led me into sales leadership. So I'm one of those fortunate people who gets to do what I love every day, and actually and get paid to do what I love. So it's awesome.
Cool. And you pick some pretty easy stuff to sell, right?
Depending on who you ask, right?
Well, yeah, because I mean, I look at it and I go, those are pretty hard sales, right? The R mark, that's kind of uniforms and industrial products. Is that true?
Uniform industrial products. Yep.
Yeah, I know that's hard.
Payroll and HR with paychecks, and now e-signature and contract lifecycle management, all that stuff. So yeah, depending on who you ask, could be considered challenging products to sell.
But it does give you that chance to change the reps' lives because I think most of those companies tend to hire younger reps, right? First time. And
Definitely at Airmark and paychecks. Yes.
yeah. And what's hard about that other than everything? First time people haven't really done, business to business sales before, haven't gotten hung up on.
I think, yeah, there's a lot that's hard about it. I would say, with a Paychex and Aramark are kind of known as being like more starter companies for B2B sales, right?
Yeah.
So you have to get really good at finding talented people who may not have the experience yet, right? And also, when you're hiring people in their sometimes early 20s, but generally early to mid 20s, sometimes late 20s, early 30s, if people are late to sales. And so it's a lot of teaching people the basics, of sales success over and over again. Things like, things that aren't often talked about, like calendar management,
Yeah.
and prioritization, and things that, what a sales process is, why, why a discovery is so important in a sales process, and why sales is not just talking people into doing things, right? So the hard part is you're taking a shot on a lot of people without a lot of, like, previous track record or history of success, and you're basing that off of several interactions in an interview process and trying to extrapolate that out to future success.
And have you found a way of finding that magic in them where the raw material doesn't come across as a great salesperson yet, but they could?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I really refined that when I was at Paychex. The reason why is because I found, early on in my leadership career, I felt I was making a lot of gut hiring decisions based on, on a subjective interview process, and I got tired. I got tired of, batting 50%, right? And I was like, I
Yeah.
need to get better at this. So I read a book called Top Grading, which is around talent selection. And I committed myself to number one, identifying what are the core competencies, that lend themselves to success in a career in sales, and then secondarily, how do you properly screen for those throughout an interview process? And so number one, you have to have an objective sales process where it's the same with every single candidate, so you get a clear look. And then number two, you have to be committed to not deviating from what your talent selection criteria is, right? So once I really devoted myself to that, what I found was I went from, like, a 50% success rate to like a 75, 80% success rate with the people that I hired, which as a sales leader makes your life
It's
so much
huge.
easier
Yeah.
if you have the right people on your team.
And what were the new ones that you saw that compared to the subjective? The subjective, I assume, was you like the person.
Yeah, it's like charisma,
Yeah.
is this person, can I picture this person going in front of somebody and not being nervous? And
Yeah.
can I picture this person being willing to deal with rejection? And like the core competencies that I identified were like, does this person have a history of being self-motivated, right? Does this person have the aptitude to not only learn our products and services and all that, but also at the same time have the aptitude to learn about the emotional and the psychology of sales and emotional intelligence and all those things that are extremely important. Obviously, work ethic is a core competency that's important. But the one that's most important to me is what is it's a psychology term, and it's called internal locus of control, and it just refers to the extent to which somebody feels like they control the things that happen to them in their lives, right? And
Yeah.
so the best salespeople feel like anything that happens to me is my fault, whether it's good or bad. It's my fault. I could have done some. If it was good, there was something that I did that created that outcome. If it was a bad outcome, what I could have done something differently that could have produced a more positive outcome. And so that's when I spent a lot of time trying to screen for and get some insight into in terms of that person's outlook on all things that happened to them in their life, not just professionally, but maybe it's you know a, from a sports background, right?
Yep.
And something bad that happened to them or good that happened to them, in their background, or something competitive or something academically. If you're hiring a new grad out of college.
Yeah. It's interesting. I did a video on the internal locus of control, and a bunch of reps were explaining, well, all the things that were outside of their control in the comments. And I like, you might not want to do that.
That's what we call an external locus of
Locus of
control.
control. Yes. And what type of questions do you use to elicit that, to kind of test for it?
You know what? I think what I got really good at was asking second and third level questions, right? So it's not the leading question. So, for example, one of the questions that I always would ask is I would ask like, "Hey, tell me about a time when you had a really, really challenging goal put in front of you. If this person had a background in sales, a really challenging quota or something that you felt was just like kind of a little like out of reach or not entirely fair, right? So that's just kind of sets the scene, the tone for the conversation, and then they're going to give you an answer which will be probably rehearsed and polished, right? But it's the
Yeah.
second and third level questions where you're really digging into like in kind of getting their real outlook on this on the scenario or the scene. And a lot of times what you'll find is you'll find that there's some people that are like, it was extremely challenging, my quota, but I backed into it and I found that like I needed to do X amount more, or I needed to focus here, or there was other areas of opportunity that I wasn't fully tapped into, versus somebody saying like, it was outrageous, right? Like, and it happens from time to
Sure.
time, right? But I'd rather have the person that's like, this looks like Mount Everest, but you know what, I'm going to give it a go. For somebody that says, I just can't, I can't climb Mount Everest. Like it's not even worth it.
And have you ever gone against this, hired somebody with an external locus of control?
Uh, I have made the decision to hire people when I wasn't 100% sold, right?
Yeah.
If I determine they have an external locus of control, it's a hard pass for me. It's going to be a no. But there are times where you can go through and I still don't feel, because that's kind of a tough. It's kind
It's
of
really
a
tough. It's really
yeah.
tough,
It
especially in an
isn't.
interview.
Yeah, and one of the things that I did was I also, because I always had recruiting partners, talent acquisition partners. One of the things that I did was I took control of the interview process. I wanted as many looks at a candidate as possible. I wanted to have my hands on them all the way throughout the entire experience. And what that allowed me to do is that allowed me to get a better feel for who they were, all like through and through, and not just in a 45-minute or a one
Yeah.
hour back and forth, where so just little things, right? Like, I give them one of the things that we would do is I would give them three references of people who had worked for me previously so that they could get a feel for
Oh,
who I was as a leader, and I would ask for three references from them. I call in the three references, and then I follow up my people and I say, hey, did X, Y, did this person call you? And if the answer was no, then it's already given me some insight into, does this person have work ethic? Are they self-motivated? So on and so forth. So,
And how about, you mentioned sports, and that comes up so much in sales. Have there been other backgrounds that also fit well?
yeah, honestly, sports, I think is the easiest one because it's like a
Yeah,
competitive background and you learn to work within a
right.
team environment. But yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the things I was known for, I've always been known for, is I've been the person who's been willing to give people opportunities, even though their background wasn't necessarily exactly a
Right.
perfect fit, right? Like I would hire people out of from our operations team when I was in the paychecks days, right? I would hire people from operations. No other sales leaders were doing that, and those people went on to be some of my top performing salespeople later on. People say sports, but it's like, yeah, if you performed at a high level in anything. It could be jazz band, it could be dance, it could be academic decathlon. It really doesn't matter. What I want to see is I just want to see somebody who has been involved with something where they're involved with something that was bigger than themselves, first and foremost, and secondarily, where they had to compete against other people to be towards the top, because sales by nature is a competitive game.
And I agree with that completely. And even the performing arts are also a performance, right? Like athletics. It
Yep.
doesn't take but a day to learn the rules of a game, but a lifetime to become really good at it.
Yep.
Sounds
Yep.
like sales, doesn't it?
100%. 100%. Yep.
um, Now, after you hire them, what do you look for in the first 90 days?
I I always use the analogy, and anybody who's ever interviewed with me in the past, they'll recognize this. The analogy I always use is going swimming, right? Like there's a segment of the population that they're like 90%, 80% of the population wades in slowly so that they can get comfortable, right? Like I'm gonna go first to
Watching
my
the water on them. Yeah.
yeah, first to my knees, then to my waist, then I'm gonna put water on my arms and chest and all that. And then 10 minutes later, finally I'm fully in, right? And then there's that smaller percentage of the population, they just walk up to the side of the pool and they just dive in head first, right? And they say,
Yeah.
hey, it's gonna be super uncomfortable for about 5 seconds. It's gonna be a shock to my system, but I'm gonna adapt to it very quickly, and I'll be enjoying the water when somebody else is still trying to, wade their way in. That's the example. So I always challenge my people, be the person that dives in, don't be the person that wades in. So that's the first thing I look for, is like a commitment to just diving in and being uncomfortable, because it's uncomfortable starting a new role, right?
Sure.
Like you don't
Yeah.
know anything, you don't have any relationships.
It's
Typically
all
you don't have a
pain.
ton of relationships. Yeah, it's just an uncomfortable spot to be in. And you got to kind of embrace that pain and swim like hell to where you can get to the next stage of your journey, which is where which is where things, you get the foundation under you and you start to really understand what's going on, and find yourself within that role.
And when do you know you got the right person, even before the performance is there in those 90 days?
uh, One of the other core competencies that was important to me in talent selection is coachability. And so to me, it is the ability to take to first of all to want the coaching, but then to accept the coaching and then go out and put it into play, right? Because we all know, like, sales is like, there's a lot of leading indicators before the results come.
Yeah.
It's like, can you get the meetings? Can you run effective meetings? Right? Can you advance things through the sales cycle? These are all things that are like leading indicators for the end result that we want, which is closed deals, closed sales, and successful months, quarters, so on and so forth. So what I look for early on is I look for the coachability. I look for a little bit of fearlessness. I look for that willingness to put themselves in an uncomfortable position. And I also look for resourcefulness too, right? Because the reality is like in sales, a lot of this is, understanding who do I need to go to get things done. How do I figure things out kind of on the fly? Because nobody's ever created a sales playbook that like has 100% of the answers in it, right? A lot of it is just baptism by fire, trial and error, and figuring things out on the go.
And when you're coaching somebody, how aggressive or honest and open do you go? Because some people don't want to hurt someone's feelings, but sometimes you just have to tell them, stop talking so much. And feelings are going to get hurt.
Hmm.
And
Hmm. It's fun. I'm honest with I'm always honest with my people. I also factor in, like, some people are more resilient than others. Some people, can handle directness more than others. I think the first thing that you have to do is you just have to really invest in people from day one. And when your people trust that you have their best interest at heart, and they know that you want what's best for them, then they're gonna seek out, and they're gonna want your feedback. They're gonna want to hear how you think about things, and they're gonna want your coaching because they know you have your best interest at heart. So that's an error I see a lot of sales leaders make, is they don't build that foundational, like, relationship and trust, so that they can be in that space where they can deliver candid feedback, timely and candid feedback for their people, because they just haven't taken the time to invest in that relationship, and to kind of put the goodwill in, so that you
yes,
can
yeah.
do the coaching.
I heard one leader describe it as, once they feel you have their back, then the coaching bandwidth is nice and broad. And a lot of reps don't understand the difference between trusting your manager and knowing your manager has your back, where there's this protective cocoon of trust instead of just this transactional relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that statement 100%.
Yeah.
And it's one of those soft leadership skills
Right. Yeah.
that, again, you can read as many leadership books as you want, but bottom line is you have however many people you have on your team. Like right now, I've got, several leaders. I'm leading leaders at this point in my career, but when I was a first line leader, um, you have 10, 12 people that you're leading. Every single one of them is going to have a different personality. Every single one of them is going to respond to the things that you tell them, or your conversations differently, and every single one of them is going to have different motivating factors. So, it's just that ability to kind of feel out each individual relationship and understand where you stand with that person, and how to meet them exactly where they're at, so that they can receive what it is that you have to say. And a lot of times you have, that's part of, like, the trust, but also get them knowing that you have their back and you have their best interest at heart.
And how do you balance this, you personally, with the demands for the revenue? Because at the beginning of the quarter, this all sounds good. And then at the third month of the quarter, things tend to change a little.
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act. It's the demands of now, and the immediate need for results versus the long-term thinking and the long-term picture. Um, when pressed, I tend to lean more towards sustainability, long-term, big picture.
Yeah.
But also, I also understand that there's times where, like, the calendar is such that we're at the end of a quarter right now, and we need to push really hard for business. And so, maybe we're more transactional in the way that we're handling things versus, a more transformational type of mindset. It's a constant, and part of it is, like, where are you at, and, like, how well has your team done to this point in the quarter, right? Like, there's so many variables and factors.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, the best are able to really adapt on the fly, and they're able to be fluid, um, based on what the situation calls for.
And let's say a rep comes to you and says, I'm looking to become a leader. Can you help me through this process? How do you walk them through that? Like,
This is my favorite. That's my favorite. My favorite scenario is, like, aspiring leaders, right? I love people who aspire to, like, move to the next phase of their sales career, and, like, go up market and all that. That's fun. That's super fun as well, right? But that's where I start. I challenge people, and the thing that I always say is that management is a title, leadership is a state of mind, right? So what are you doing? Like, it shouldn't be, if you were to get promoted from an account executive to a, to a leadership role, it shouldn't, everybody on your team shouldn't look at each other and be like,
Him?
what? Brian's a leader? Like they hired him to do that? It should be an assumption. It should be known that you're next up, right? And how do you build that? Well, you build that by carrying yourself like a leader from
Yeah.
the, on a day-to-day basis. You learn that by being your I always say like your leader's lieutenant, right? Or you're the, in mafia terms, who's the underboss or who's the
Right.
capo, right? Like you're the person who's running things when the leader's on PTO or when the leader's at an offsite meeting. Um, are you mentoring people? Are you building a brand and are you connecting with other people outside of your existing team? Are you building that brand of where you're creating relationships with other leaders throughout the organization and so there's just what I do when somebody has that conversation is I kind of like just walk them through the blueprint of like what the like how you get to the next level, right? And I always tell them like, hey, look, like when you get to the interview, the first question, like me as an area VP, second level leader, right? Like the first question I'm asking is like, okay, what specific examples do you have of you functioning as a leader, you impacting somebody's performance? And the reality is a lot of people who are going from like who are it's their first job. Well, I'm available to my people. I'm like a leader, and that's like, that doesn't really extrapolate, right? Like, have you formally mentored somebody? Did you conduct a weekly one-on-one with that person?
Yeah.
Did you do live call coaching with them? What was their performance when you first started mentoring them? And what was their performance at the end of the 6-month period or the fiscal year or whatever? Right. And so I help people to kind of like think of it through the terms of like building this case for themselves, where they're not only building the experience and like and getting exposure to these different experiences, but they're also putting hard data together of the impact that they've had on people when they've served in a leadership type of a role.
And I'm sure a lot of them come to you because for the wrong reasons. They've been an AE a little bit too long. They're turning 30. They just started a family, or they don't want to work the phones as much. Kind of like all the wrong reasons to become a leader.
hmm
Uh,
hmm
Have you been able to find a way of getting them from that to where they want to be?
Um, I've talked people out of leadership
Yeah,
plenty of
it's
times in the past,
not right
right?
for
I mean, the first
everybody.
question is why leadership, right?
Yeah,
Because if you want your business card to say manager, district sales at Paychex was district sales manager at DocuSign, it's regional vice president, right? If you're doing it for the title or you're doing it because you feel like, I guess leadership makes sense, right? Like
it's
I've
the
been
next
I've been
step.
doing this for
Yeah,
a while, right? It seems logical. Like if there's not a deep intrinsic like pull for you towards leadership, then I question it, right? And then the other side of that is that's another reason why it's really good to have people like do formal mentoring roles, and run meetings and do one-on-ones and things of that nature, because it gives them like low risk exposure to
yep,
leadership where they can flush that out and say, you know what, like I really don't like this. Like what happens for a lot of top performing salespeople is they get in leadership and they realize they run into this sobering reality of not everybody has the same work ethic as them and the same drive as them, right? And or the same like ability to pick
style.
things up very quickly as them, right?
Yeah,
And it's very frustrating when it's like, well, I can control myself and I know that I'm gonna not let myself down, but it's much harder trying to have your entire evaluation as an employee based upon what 10 other people are doing, right? Like, a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. So, there's no easy answer to it. I think, for me, it's really, I want to cut down to the why. Why do you want leadership? Why is this so important to you? Um, and if it matches up and I feel like they've shown the rights, like they have the right, like traits
yep.
and they've showed up the right way, well then I'm going to dive in head first and I'm going to challenge them to really like to buy in, to build into leadership.
And what was your first year like leading leaders? 'Cause I got to imagine that's a big different than leading reps.
Sure, yeah. So this was at Paychex, and it was a, obviously, uh, it was great, first of all, because what I liked about it is that when you're leading a team full of leaders, right? These are all people who are further along in their career, who may have a little bit more of a mature outlook. When I say mature outlook, I just mean like the ability to like have a wider perspective
Yeah.
versus just like,
My
what's my
number.
quota? I'm going for
Yeah.
my quota. I'm going for my number, right? Like, how does this impact me? They can have a little bit more of a wide angle lens and kind of understand how all the various pieces of the organization fit together, and the big picture. So I really enjoyed that aspect because my mind's always really been wired that way of being a really big picture thinker and understanding, all aspects of an organization and everything and how everything needs to work together to create sustainable success within an organization. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. What I didn't enjoy was I still have this aspect, this side of me that loves being in the trenches, rolling up my sleeves, assisting with the sales process. Hey Brian, can you hang on for just 1 second? My
Yeah.
dog wants to go outside really bad, so let me
Sure.
just we'll pause it for 1 second. Great. So yeah, love the aspect of like lead of that aspect of leading leaders. But I still have this side of me that loves to be heavily involved with the day to day. No, I don't want to say the day to day, more so deal strategy,
Customers.
getting
Yeah.
things across the finish line. And so what I love at DocuSign is that it's a I'm up market, so there's a need for executive sponsorship and executive alignment, and so I still get to scratch that itch of being heavily like being involved with customers on a certain level and deal strategy and so on and so forth. But at the same time, having the higher level conversations, developing the leaders that work under me, and having a bigger impact on more people.
Cool. Hey, Jordan, it's been a lot of fun today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
All right, yeah. Well, I don't, I was nominated for this, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn under Jordan Price. And I'm dark on social media outside of LinkedIn. But yeah, happy to connect with anybody if you want to further discussion or have any questions, follow ups. Happy to connect with you on LinkedIn.